And how many guys know where Habakkuk is? It's sandwiched in between two other books, obviously, because it's in the Bible, as Bob so eloquently put it. Habakkuk is a good book, and Habakkuk is one of the minor prophets. Now, I know that this might, and just so you guys know, there's Bibles in your seats if you guys want to go there. You can use a Bible app, or if you guys have a Bible. Now, just so I say this, if you have to look in the table of contents, no judgment, okay? All right, and if some of you have already opened the Bibles that we have here and you got a page number, you could shout it out and give someone a hand getting there faster. But anyway, we're going to be in Habakkuk, and we're going to be talking through the book of Habakkuk in, what's that? 5:21, good. And we're going to be discovering what this prophet had to say to his people and how that can be an encouragement, a support, a strengthener for ourselves in our current dilemma. And Habakkuk is one of the wonderful... Now, it's called the minor prophets, not because, like, in the Old Testament, the books were called major and minor prophets, and some people might assume, like, when they look at the major and minor prophets, they're like, okay, major prophet, this must be a really, really important book. And minor prophets, but the reason that they're called major and minor prophets is the size of the book, how many pages the book is, or how many verses or chapters the book is. Now, Habakkuk only has 3 chapters. And one of the interesting things about Habakkuk is that a lot of the minor and major prophet books of the Bible are really invested in a message from God that the prophet spoke to people. Now, the thing that makes Habakkuk so different is it records a conversation with a prophet and God. It records a conversation of a prophet with God and how this prophet experienced his life and what this prophet was going through and the struggles that he was facing in his day and the things that were going on in his life. Now, how many of you guys would honestly say that there have been times in your life that you have been utterly confused about what God is doing? The rest of you liars can lift your hand now. Some of you were shaking your head. Don't take that personal. Every moment that, there's moments in our life that we come up to this experience and we're seeing what's happening in the world around us. We're seeing what's happening in our own life. We're seeing what's taking place. And we're just like, as I'm titling this morning, this doesn't make sense. I just don't get this. I'm a little bit confused. I'm a little bit perplexed by how life is now or what you're doing or where you're going. How many of you guys have ever heard the name Nick Vujicic? You guys ever heard of Nick Vujicic? Yeah, it's a mouthful. He's the guy who wrote a book called Life Without Limbs. If you guys haven't read the book, look at the book. If you guys haven't seen any of his videos, YouTube, they are riddled all over the internet. But Nick Vujicic, it's up on the screen there, Vugicic, Life Without Limbs, in his book, he says, just because I don't understand God's plans doesn't mean that he is not with me. Now, if you know Nick Vujicic, you know that he was born without limbs. Like, he's literally a torso and a head. And you got to watch him because he's funny. I mean, this guy is just hysterical. And he goes to schools and he talks about different things like bullying. He talks about different things, about things that he's experienced in his life, the trauma and reality of how he was born and how it didn't make sense and just how he faced those difficulties, how he faced those challenges. And he is someone who has said, hey, I may not understand. I don't get it. I'm a little confused. I'm a little perplexed about where life is leading and what's happening and where things are going, but that doesn't mean that God is not with me. And the Bible takes various different approaches to the human struggle. I mean, we could go to the book of Genesis and we could see one answer there, and then we go to Job and we're like, whoa, that guy really went through some serious stuff, and we see another answer there, and then we go to the New Testament and we see even another answer there. It's not that the Bible is intending in any way, shape, or form to contradict itself, because the Bible does not contradict itself. It is speaking to the facets, the many different shapes and forms our human body and our human experience take. It's got to speak to each one of us individually. So if you look at something and you feel like, oh, well, that's kind of weird because it said it this way here and this way there. The truth is that the Bible is approaching our needs from different angles. If you were to be able to, like God, step up there and look at the whole story, look at the whole text, look at everything that the Bible contains in it, and be able to interpret it all, you would make sense of one massive story that's unfolding. And it would all make sense. But human suffering is so vast that we need many different ways to think about and approach it. And this Old Testament narrative, sometimes we look a lot to the New Testament and we think, oh, well, there's a lot that the New Testament has to say about today. And sometimes we wonder if these ancient texts have any kind of business speaking into our lives. And I would assure you that this is a good book, and it has a message for us over the next 6 weeks that I really want you guys to dig deep. It's only 3 chapters long, so it wouldn't be very hard to read through it. It's not a huge investment. I would ask you guys to really take some time perhaps to read through it, to pray about it, to ask God to speak to you about what's going on in this story. Now, we have to realize also that as we read this story, we've got to read it in its entirety. We've got to read it in its context. We've got to put ourselves in what's going on in this story, or we are going to be utterly confused about the events that are taking place. If you divorce any set of words from its context, it will be really, really confusing. It won't make full sense. And so just to give you guys a little bit of background about what's going on in Habakkuk, there are 17 prophetic books in the Old Testament, and divided between the major prophets, which are 5 books, and the minor prophets, which are 12 books. Okay, now you guys already know why they're major and minor, because the size of the book. And we're talking about short books here. Habakkuk contains 56 verses. It contains 56 verses. And Habakkuk is a special book because unlike any other prophetic book, it records the dialogue between one man and God. For example, Isaiah contains a message from God to the people, while Habakkuk records a conversation with God. And some of us have been through life before where we have felt that we have questioned God. We felt that things have been overwhelming, that things have been truly troubling in our life, and it just doesn't make sense. It's not clear. We take a look at the story, and we can only make out a small portion of it, and it just seems so very confusing. So very confusing. Here's a little bit more history here. The year is likely around 605 BC in Israel, and the nation God promised through the lineage of Abraham had a down cycle in their relationship with God. If you guys were to trace the story through the Old Testament, it seems like these guys are up one day and down the next. They make good decisions, bad decisions, good decisions, bad decisions. And don't stand there and say, man, them stupid Israelites. We are much the same way. And so the voice of God came through the voice of prophets, and he wanted communion with his creation and was relentless about it. But before Habakkuk, there was this King David who had a heart after God, and then King Solomon who finished the temple. And it's a long story, guys. Get into the book. It's a good book. Okay? So Israel, God's chosen, finds themselves again wandering. They find themselves walking away from God. Now, King Josiah, okay? How many of you guys know how King Josiah was when he became king? 8. Who's got an 8-year-old? Who's got an 8-year-old grandkid? Whew. Can you guys imagine that for just a minute? What? No, but King Josiah was awesome. This guy was incredible. Like, he was cleaning up the temple, he was doing some work, and it's likely he found some texts. And it's likely that the texts that he found were the Pentateuch, and that's just another word for the first books of the Bible. He finds the Pentateuch, and he's overwhelmed by the reality. They read him, and they realize that they need to change the way that they are doing things. And so they begin to lead culture in a change. They begin to turn Israel back to God's chosen, back to God himself. And then about 609 BC, the good King Josiah died. And after his death, the nation plunged headlong back into the cesspool of corruption, immorality, and adultery, plagued it for so many generations. But this time the people seemed hell-bent on destruction. Instead of edging toward the cliff, they were determined to plunge over at full speed. It was as if the nation had a death wish and no use for God at all. I mean, it was a mess. It was a big, big mess. And then enter Habakkuk. Enter Habakkuk. And Habakkuk, if you look at the first chapter of Habakkuk, and we'll bounce around here a little bit, but it says that the prophecy that Habakkuk and the prophet that Habakkuk the prophet received. And this is what he says. If you're looking at the NIV, it says Habakkuk's complaint. All right, it's pretty clear. Verse 2, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. So that justice is perverted. This prophet is overwhelmed. He looks at what's happening and he just says, why? What for? What are you doing? Why is this happening? Why is this such a mess? Why am I seeing this day after day? God, why aren't you responding? I pray and I seek and I seek. Do you notice the devastation all around? Do you realize how big a mess this nation has found itself in? Sound familiar, doesn't it? Scarily familiar. It sounds scarily familiar because he is going through this process of protesting to God. Why? And so many of us today, when we look at some of the injustices that are unfolding right before our eyes, we are asking the very same question. As we watch as people are being, if we look at it on both sides, let's be transparent for just a minute. We look at not just the violence that is happening that is causing person after person to have to be killed because they're so violent and so focused and fixated on violence of others. Cops are killing people, people are killing cops. It's a mess. Babies are being slaughtered by the millions through abortion. I don't want to be overwhelming this morning, but parents are throwing their children in the trash. This is atrocious. And when he saw his community, his people in terrible moral decline, he prayed to God, do something. Do something. Habakkuk is probably around 30 at this point. Now, this is where I say that you've got to never divorce the Bible from its context. And the reason I'm saying this is I saw this on a t-shirt once. And I've seen it a couple quotes online. Like, okay, do you realize what's happening here? But in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5, it says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm doing something in your day that you would not believe even if you were told. And if you stop there, you're like, whoo, this is going to be good. God's going to unfold, and God's going to bring another king into power, and he's going to set things right. God's going to start a revival. God's going to do something huge, and it's going to change everything. If we stop there, we'll rob the story of its context. And I know that it's hard when we look at a book like this and we begin to understand what God is about to do. It can terrify us, and we could cause a lot of questions for us. But he goes on to say, I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth and seize dwellings not their own. Many people knew them. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like the eagle, swooping to devour. They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like the desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all the fortified cities, and building earthen ramps, they capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty people whose own strength is their God. What? It can cause some serious confusion. It can cause some serious doubt. Now, let me say this real quick. We are living in a culture right now that is afraid to approach an understanding of God and wrath. And the only reason, one of the only reasons is because we're just confused. We don't understand it. We have a culture that has manipulated and distorted the view of love. And if God loves us, then wrath can't be present, or justice can't be present, or something like calamity or terror or allowing us to give way to our own wickedness in order for us to fall on our face. In our current time, wrath appears to confuse love. Modern love is a throwaway word. It's just a throwaway word. I mean, you love your new MacBook. You love that new shirt. All right? Now, this is a different kind of love. This is a love that's powerful. This is a love that's profound. When we lose the true identity of love, we miss out on who God really is and the depth that of who he is and the depth of the things that he does. If we would better understand God and his love, we would be less afraid of his other attributes that don't align with our comfortable perspectives. God was going to do something frightening in their day. God was going to do something frightening in their day. The Babylonians, a feared people, were going to be unleashed on them. If you were to look at the book of Habakkuk, the 3 chapters of Habakkuk, you would see here, chapter 1, faith tested, chapter 2, faith taught, chapter 3, faith triumphant. If you were to look at his own personal journey, you would see an argument, an answer, and acceptance. Now, I know that at first appearance it might not look possible because this looks like a bad situation, but Habakkuk experiences revolutionary change. He goes from fear to faith, burden to blessing, perplexity to praise, confusion to confidence, worry to worship. Habakkuk begins with a question mark and ends with an exclamation mark. I was counseling with somebody just the other day, and these are their words. I'm exhausted with life, and I would kill myself if it weren't for the fact that I'm a coward as well as I don't have the guts to carry it out. I see therapists and psychiatrists, but they don't help. They stuff me with drugs and send me on my way. Why is God silent? Why does he not act? Where is the Lord? He opens as a confused man, agitated and disillusioned. Habakkuk starts with this. His struggle is, if I were to compartmentalize it in 3 things. Number 1, unanswered prayer. He's confused. Sooner or later, we wonder about the seeming inactivity of God. Let's be real. Okay? Every once in a while, we get concerned at the seemingly inactivity of God. He's started off with verse 2. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? His time was a pretty awful time, and people were perishing. Things were unfolding in his culture unlike any other, and he's overwhelmed, and he's depressed, and he's frustrated, and he's like, God, what are you doing? Now, some of us can really feel overwhelmed about the pressures of the things that are going on in the world, but sometimes this takes a more personal experience. And we can find ourselves overwhelmed about things that we are facing personally. He was overwhelmed by the uncontrolled perversity and violence. When lawlessness prevails, no one is safe. When lawlessness prevails, no one is safe. And lawlessness was prevailing in his day. I believe right now that we're living in a time where we're robbing children of their youth. It should be shocking to us. As much prohibition as we had, as much push towards setting people free from slavery. Do you know that in our current culture, in our current time, in our current world, there are more slaves today than there ever has been in any other time in history? Children, I was just looking at the Facebook feed the other day, and there's a young woman that's just been taken, and they keep changing her hair color to try to keep her from being noticed, but she's underage, and she's been sold into sex slavery. It's real. And then Habakkuk finds himself, issue 3, an unexpected answer. I mean, everyone knew the Babylonians. They were the most hated and the most feared nation on earth. Under the leadership of King Nebuchadnezzar, their armies plunged the nations around them. If they conquered a city that was considered insufficiently servile, they might put a pile of skulls in the city plaza as a warning not to rebel against them. They poked, I don't want to be grotesque, but they poked the eyes out of conquered kings and marched the rulers off in chains. Sometimes they put hooks in their jaws to carry them along. And so Habakkuk does what we do. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Matthew 11:28-30 says, come to me all who are weary or burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's Jesus speaking. Look. If you're having a hard time, if you're struggling, if you're challenged, come to me and I will give you rest. I will give you peace. I will calm your soul. I will help you in your dilemma and your time of need. And that's what Habakkuk is doing. Yeah, God, help me. Help me. And things just don't unfold the way that he anticipated. Now, for time's sake, I won't go too much further, but Habakkuk voices his second complaint. Lord, are you not from everlasting, my God, my Holy One? You will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. O my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil and cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in the dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest foods. Is he to keep the emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? And he says this is kind of getting into next week, but he says, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give his complaint. Let me finish with 3 things. I want to finish with 3 thoughts here. There's some very important insights that we need to find ourselves in right here. The only way that we are going to find peace is in intimacy. But here's my first thought here. We see only part of the picture. We only see part of the picture. Every once in a while, I've tried to figure the intricacies of God's ways, and I just find myself so confused. Some have said it this way: if life were a painting, the palette of colors he uses are eccentric, the brushstrokes specific, his canvas massive. If we're not careful, we will find ourselves fixated on a moment, and there's so much more than we see. When the painting is finished and we back up and we see the masterpiece and we see the intricacies and we see the breathtaking and magnanimousness of what he has accomplished, we are awed. But when we are in the moment, we are looking at something and we can't fully understand the broadness of his work. I'm just like, I don't get it, God. I don't get it. We only see part of the picture, though. And number 2, God isn't limited by what we think he ought to do. Psalm 115:3 says, our God is in heaven. He does whatever pleases him. And don't be scared about that, because he's pleased with his love for you. He is. He's pleased with your worship to him. Don't be afraid of that. But he's God. And he does what he pleases. Why would I want to limit him to the breadth of my finite mind? Why would I want to limit him to the expanse of his understanding? To the articulate way that he produces answers and he creates things, the way that life seems to ebb and flow and move back and forth. Why would I want to constrict him to my finite understanding? And third, we need a bigger God. We need a bigger God. Habakkuk got his mind messed up because he thought he knew what God should do. He thought he knew what God should do. And this morning I want to ask you, how big is your God? How big is your God? How big is your understanding of God? How mighty are his ways in your mind? When you look at the moment, when you look at the situation, when you look at the current circumstance, do you see a magnanimous God who is working out things that we could have never orchestrated aside from walking through the middle of what feels like hell? Or are we looking at a God that doesn't make any sense to us and we wonder, are you even doing anything? How big is your God? How big is your God? Is your God big enough? Big enough. Now, the last term you thought that the next term of our presidency, whoever gets elected, is your God big enough to trust him in any way? Is your God too wise to make mistakes? I mean, come on. When you face the moment of crisis and you're in the middle of it, only reflecting do we come, after the end, only on reflecting do we come to discover what God was up to. God is too wise for mistakes, right? Is your God big enough? God is too kind to be cruel. Will we always miss what God is doing we will always miss what God is doing if we fixate our minds on what he is not doing. God is subtle, but he is not malicious. God is subtle, but he's not malicious. Romans 28, 28, and 29, and we know that all things, guys, all things, everything, we've heard this verse a million times, but all things work together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Hey, got news for you. All of you are called according to his purpose. Every single one of you. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, shaped and changed and made like Jesus Christ, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. What that basically means is Jesus Christ created an opportunity for adoption, and we are now adopted sons and daughters of the living King, of God himself. God is too kind to be cruel. How big is your God? God always knows best and does what is best in his timeline. Don't short circuit his maturation process. He is maturing you. He is doing something new in you. We want to bug out or beg off while God wants to prepare us for his great work. We don't understand it. So we're like, God, instead of praying, and I've prayed this before. God, I don't want to go through this. Just yank me out of this. I want to go up and over. I want to go around. Whatever other route there is, God, I don't care. I just want to be around this situation, around this mess. And God's like, no, I'm going to draw you through it. I'm going to allow you to come through it. I know that it's tough, but how big is your God? He always knows what's best. Always. God is in control, therefore we can rest easy. The same sun that hardens the clay melts the wax. It's our choice whether we will let the inevitable suffering and misfortune of life harden or soften us. This is a tough choice. We've heard it said this way, you can become better or bitter, right? You know, like in your moment, in your circumstance, in your situation, when we're crying out to God and we just don't understand what God is doing, we're so perplexed, we're so confused. This doesn't make sense. God is in control. Rest easy. Don't be afraid that when you confront the perplexities of your life, that he's going to allow the heat to melt the hardness of your heart instead of making it more brittle and more hard and more calloused. Allow him to soften you. And we must learn not to trace the hand of God, but instead we must trace his heart. And if you go to Habakkuk 3:19, the sovereign Lord is my strength. This is his words. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. He enables me to tread on the heights. Byron led a song at the worship night on Friday night this last week, and I asked him if he would come and lead this song again for us. Hey, go ahead, come on, Byron. And ultimately, through all this is what I want to say to you. It may not make sense, but that doesn't mean that God isn't doing something. How many of you guys remember the show Friday Night Lights? You guys ever entertained by that? One of the things that I know it's just a television show, but whatever. This football school in West Texas, it was a series where coach had 3 phrases. He said, clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. All right? Let me add a little bit to it. Clear eyes, full hearts, no fear. God is good. And that's what I want to leave you with today. I know that it seems like I brought you to this place and you're like, okay, we're talking about, you got to let this series build, okay? You got to come each week. And if you can't come each week, you got to check online because this is going to build, it's going to accumulate. And I really, really believe and hope and pray that trusting God through this series, though my faith be shaken, we will discover who he really is and it will bring us to better places. And I tell you this, you cannot get there without true intimacy. You can't just know of God if you're going to make it. You got to know God. I mean, we study this good book, and it's no good to us if we just study and grow in our knowledge. It's no good to us if it doesn't draw us closer to him, if it doesn't make us more intimate, if it doesn't create a more personal experience in our life, if it doesn't make us come to him and know him personally. And God is wanting you to know that this morning, that though your faith be shaken, it doesn't make sense. I don't get it. I'm frustrated. The world, America feels like it's falling apart. God, what are you doing? We are watching as Christians in other countries are being slaughtered for their faith. I was watching a video this last week, and it was, I'll share the clip sometime, but there was this church in this German town, and this train came by, and the train broke down, and there were people inside of that train that were being taken to concentration camps, and they were about to be slaughtered, and the people in the church, the pastor heard them crying out for help, and what did he do? He told the church to sing louder instead of walking out those doors. church, it is devastating to me what we're seeing, but I know that I will not make it through without a connection to God. When it hits home, when it hurts personally, you have to put your faith in Him. You have to place your confidence in the creator of the everything, the creator of the cosmos, the God who put it all together. If you were to go as far as microscopes, as far as telescopes, as far as satellites have been able to go up into the universe and look at the vastness of all that's around us and how seemingly it is all held together, and recognized how big our God is, step back. Don't be afraid. I love Habakkuk because I love how he sat down with God and said, God, I've got a dilemma. We need to talk. And some of you this morning, you've been talking for some time. Some of you have yet to talk. Some of you need to find that place with Him and say, hey, I've got a situation and I really, really need something to change. But church, if it doesn't change, will you still trust Him? That's what's going to count. If it doesn't change, will you still put your confidence and hope in Him? If it doesn't change, will you still believe in Him? If it doesn't change, will you still say, yes, I trust you, God? Listen to the words of this song and just let it settle in. Find your place of worship this morning. Just for a few minutes, okay? Just for a few minutes, find God.
Define me, you're inside me, you're my reality. Ground I'm standing on. Thoughts define me, you're inside me, you're my reality. I belong closer than the skin on my bones. Closer than the song on my tongue. Thoughts define me. You're inside me. You're my reality. Abba, I belong to you. Abba, I belong to you. Thoughts define me. You're inside me. You're my reality. Abba, I belong to you. Abba, I belong to you.
Abba is one of the most intimate terms that we can give God. It means Father. Not an ordinary father, but a close father. Personal. Deep. I'm going to ask you guys to be brave this morning, and as I feel the need to do this, if there's something going on and you need a moment with Him, you need a connection today. I know this is hard, but would you stand? If you need God to do something today, would you stand? Thank you. I mean like right now. If you need God to do something profound, if you need God in your life, would you stand? Anybody else? I know it's hard. Some of you don't know these people very well. You're concerned what they're going to think. Don't care what they think. Just don't care what they think. You guys be brave enough this morning. If you need God to come to you, not to just take you out of it, but to just whisper, I love you. I'm your Abba. I'm with you. I'll never walk away. Jesus, I thank you this morning and for the bravery of those who stood today and the struggle of those who might be dealing with something but just can't stand up. I pray that you would come to us, God, that we would feel your affections for us, not in an emotionally driven or tense moment, but that we would feel your love for us in a profound way. That in a world that is so corrupt and so broken and we're so confused, God, I pray that we wouldn't get so fixated on what you're not doing that we lose sight of what you've been doing all along. That we lose sight of the work that you have invested into our lives, that we lose sight of the greatness of your love, that we lose sight of how much you've accomplished thus far, and the plan for our pain that you have tomorrow. Come to the afflicted today, God, because some people in this room, they're dealing with it. They've been wounded by words. They've been hurt by others. They've been hurt by the world. They've been affected by callous. Lord, it's what we see, but God, sometimes it's so personal. The things that they are personally dealing with right now, God, I pray that you would invade their soul and fill them with your love. Fill them with your love, Lord. That we would say, clear eyes, full heart, no fear, God is good. That we would put our confidence in you, God, today. In our perplexity, that we would know that the one sure thing that we can stand with, the one sure thing in this world is that your love will sustain us. Your love will carry us. That you are with us. It's in Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.